This is Healthcare Now Radio's Talking the Walk. Come along with us as host Tom Testa and his guests discuss the strides being made toward actionable changes in the industry. It's a fast-paced 30 minutes, so keep up. And now, here's Tom Testa.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking the Walk. I'm your host, Tom Testa. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Michael Bailey, a longtime leader in the pharmaceutical and biotech space who brings more than 3 decades of experience to the table. Michael currently serves as president and CEO of AVEO Oncology. Today, we're going to walk through Michael's career journey and his current role, take a closer look at AVEO Oncology's impressive momentum over the past 5 years, and break down the deal that brought AVEO into the LG Chem Life Sciences family. Michael, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast.
Let's start off a little bit. I gave a little teaser about kind of your background, but I want you to really set yourself up with our audience. Talk to us about your background, passions, and anything that really led you to where you are today.
Sure. Just a little bit of a snapshot on my career. I started my career in healthcare in 1992, actually in London at SmithKline Beecham, where I was an intern during business school. And then I was brought in for a full-time job. It was kind of a small executive training class that Jerry Carabells, who was president at the time, had initiated, and ultimately ended up yielding some really great leaders like Ron Square from Array, Alexander Hardy, Genentech, BioMarin. So, great program, good exposure to a variety of things. And I learned a lot in big pharma, but one of the things I kind of realized was the importance of bringing the patient early into the development process wasn't really the strength of big pharma. And, as under the advisement of Jerry, started looking around to what were emerging at that point, biotechs. And now they're, hallmarks in our industry, but Genentech, Amgen were some of the first. And I ended up taking an opportunity with Genentech as a director of new products. And again, when I think about biotech, what I really liked about it, again, brought the customer into the development process earlier, very responsive, nimble, truly innovative companies. And the other thing that I don't think people realize is just the culture of having fun, working hard and playing hard was absolutely a foundation of the biotech culture. So going from that kind of early entry into biotech through obviously lots of mentors and a lot of colleagues who really encouraged me to continue to expand my experience, I grew in increasing roles and responsibilities, moving to ImClone Systems, who was acquired by Lilly. Then I was at a small company in Boston called Synta that is now MadGrill. And then joined AVEO in 2010 as the chief commercial officer. And, I think the things I liked about AVEO and what got me excited was, their lead program. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but FOTIVDA or tivozanib, we commonly refer to it as TiVo, just for short. And really impressed by the people there and the science that was being driven and innovated within the company. But if you know anything about AVEO, it's not all kind of fun and games. At the end of the day, 2013, we ended up with a complete response letter for FOTIVDA from the FDA. And as you might imagine, that created significant challenges. They didn't really need a chief commercial officer at that point because we had nothing to commercialize. So I switched my role to chief business officer at that time. 2015 comes along, and at this point I'm kind of ready to move on to another opportunity because I just didn't agree with the strategic direction the company was going into. Henry Termeer was our chairman of the board, and I expressed my concerns and difference of opinion, and he said, "What would you do?" And I told him, and he said, "Do you want to be CEO?" And so that's how I became CEO. Ultimately, we took the company down to 20 people, moved forward, completed a phase 3 study, got an approval in 2021 for FOTIVDA, and effectively turned around the company. Fast forward a couple of years, LG came in and acquired us, and here we are. So that's a very rapid timeline. Hopefully that's helpful.
It is. No, that's great to hear. Just especially that journey, your path along the way, even before AVEO. Talk to us a little bit. So you teased a little bit about the company, but tell us about what AVEO does.
Yeah, so AVEO is exclusively an oncology focused company. I would say we're kind of agnostic as to what kind of therapeutics. We have a small molecule approved, that's Fotivda, what we've talked about. But our kind of homegrown antibodies are our next generation. We're looking at a variety of different tumors. Kidney cancer is where we started with Fotivda, but we're looking at head and neck cancer, AML. We're trying to tackle cachexia, which is a disease that has no effective treatment and impacts a tremendous number of cancer patients. So we're kind of agnostic at that, and we'll get into some of the LG stuff. But one of the ways that we're continuing to expand our portfolio is just looking out for kind of new innovative technologies. We actually just in-licensed a PERK inhibitor from a company called Hybricel, a first-in-class drug that we're going to be developing in kidney cancer. And we expect to expand our portfolio that way. But also there's a tremendous amount of innovative cutting-edge technology that's going on at LG in Korea that we hope to move forward also to enhance that portfolio.
Over the past 5 years, there's been some amazing successes happening at AVEO, including TiVo, stuff like that. Can you talk to us about the successes and, again, especially that around the development and commercialization of TiVo?
So TiVo or Fotivda is a potent and selective VEGF inhibitor. Now, importantly, this is the seventh VEGF inhibitor to come to market. So one might say, well, that's not so innovative, but a drug is not a drug is not a drug. One drug that hits a target it doesn't do the same thing as another drug that hits a target. And you have to learn that through clinical trials. And one of the things that was really special and encouraging about Fotivda was that it is very selective against VEGF R1, 2, and 3. So you give a complete VEGF blockade, but it does that in that selective way, which translates into better tolerability. And the last thing you want to do for a cancer patient is make them more sick than they were before from the therapy you're giving them. This goes back again to why I was very excited about biotech, the innovation of using an antibody instead of using poison or chemotherapy to treat a patient was very attractive to me and really has been a hallmark of my career. Again, so TiVo or Fotivda really fit in perfectly with that idea because it does provide the patients with efficacy, but a better quality of life or tolerability. So we've continued to explore TiVo in a recent phase 3 study, which was TiNivo-2, and that's combining it with immunotherapy, in fact, nivolumab. But it was after immunotherapy. So conventional wisdom was I treat immunotherapy combination up front. This is kidney cancer. Mm-hmm. And then at patient relapse or refractory, a lot of physicians were using immunotherapy again without a whole lot of data to support it. And so one of the studies we did, the TiNivo-2, was a major phase 3 study that explored whether adding Nivo to TiVo in that second line or relapse refractory setting was beneficial. And in fact, this was a quote unquote failed study, but the oncology community got a tremendous amount of information about it, about treatment paradigms and sequencing. But in addition to that, it provided a huge contemporary data set for us as a control arm of TiVo alone, which showed again that this was very effective and well tolerated in these patients. And building off of that, now we're moving into, there's an ongoing study with a cooperative group called the STRIKE study, which is once again combining TiVo with immunotherapy, but in an adjuvant setting, so in an early setting, where it's so very critical that these patients, because they're generally healthy, I mean, they have cancer, but they're generally healthy. So the last thing you want to do is provide them toxicity or compromise their lives with toxicity. So we were very pleased that the cooperative group had selected TiVo as the combination with Pembro.
Michael, I want to actually ask you too. We talked a little bit about what's happened over the last 5 years. Can you walk us through? I want to get into the LG Chem Life Sciences aspect of things. You mentioned them a little bit. Walk us through the deal that led to the acquisition of AVEO Oncology by LG Chem Life Sciences.
Glad to. I think in order to kind of set that discussion up, talk a little bit about the rest of our pipeline. So you have
Please.
ficlatuzumab, which is an HGF-c-MET inhibitor. We're currently in a phase 3 study called the Fierce Head and Neck study, combining with my old friend from ImClone, Erbitux, which is an EGFR inhibitor, and was personally involved in launching that program. So it's nice to kind of get back with agents that you've been in touch with, but also, and most importantly, the people who are working in head and neck, which is a very devastating disease. I mean, if you think about head and neck cancer, it's not only you got cancer and you know it, but you see it because it's here. And not only you see it, but your caregivers see it and people around. So a lot of depression associated with it. So really unique and high unmet medical need. But in addition to that, we're working with the Blood Cancer United group to do a combination of ficlatuzumab and venetoclax and AZA for AML patients. It's called the BEAT AML study. So again, these are opportunities that wouldn't have happened without LG. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about the biotech sector and the challenges that face them. One of them is getting resources to be able to develop your compounds. So the reason I bring up ficlatuzumab with relation to LG is because that's where the discussion started. We were looking for a partner to help us start the Fierce Head and Neck study, to help us expand into AML, et cetera. And so we started the discussions with them. They also were looking for a commercialization capabilities and a proven track record. And I mentioned we launched in 2021. Well, remember what was happening in 2021? There was a global pandemic going on. So the idea that you can't actually contact your customers to launch a product that requires education and familiarization with the data. So that was a uniquely challenging time. I am very pleased to say that ZS Associates, which does kind of third-party independent research, recognized our launch during COVID as one of the best of that year. And there was a lot of failed launches during that year, kind of reflecting the challenges that I just shared. But I think what made us successful, and this kind of goes back to big pharma versus biotech, there's a playbook. Here's how you do things, right? Well, when you're launching in a global pandemic, the playbook doesn't really work, And so we were always all about kind of creating a plan, a strategy, tactics that were specific and customized to the situation that we were in. We didn't really follow a playbook. I mean, to the extent that we used a playbook, it was just to make sure we didn't miss something important. But as far as how we approached it, it was really, I think, a testament to the team who really came up with creative ways to access the customers. We took a very aggressive approach on hiring the best of the best to make sure that we have the relationships that can break through this new challenge. So again, that's a little bit of why the LG acquisition occurred. But I think probably one of the most important things here is a shared mission and vision. So the mission being, improving the lives of patients with cancer, the vision becoming a leader in this space, a global oncology leader. Both us and LG really embraced that idea. And so there was that common approach there. And then on top of that, the culture was very much, as I described earlier, work hard, play hard. Everybody here, including the LG team, work tirelessly, but we also find time to have fun. And I think that's really important. But strategically, this also provided LG with a footprint in the US, a commercial organization that had proven success, and a portfolio of products to be able to bring to the next generation of patients. So we are really excited about the deal, and it's really gone very well for us.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Talking the Walk on Healthcare Now Radio. I'm Tom Testa, and joining me today is Michael Bailey, the CEO of AVEO Oncology. So you hinted there that LG Chem, they are an international organization. Where are they based out of, Michael?
In Seoul, Korea. And in fact, I believe this is an accurate statement, but this acquisition was the first acquisition of a US biotech company by a Korean company. And I think it was a little surprising to me because we hear a lot about a lot of the Japanese companies who've, gotten a foothold here. But in fact, this was the first acquisition by a Korean company for a US pharmaceutical company, which kind of cool.
That is very cool. And now, aside from the coolness of it all, too, was there any challenges? What did you guys, anything you experienced on that side of things with the acquisition?
Yeah, I mean, with any marriage, there's challenges, but I would say overall, it's been going great. If we think about when I set out to do this deal, it was a win-win-win, right? And interestingly enough, the M&A guy on their side, his name was Jay Win. So I said, your name from now on is Jay Win-Win. And we think about what does that mean with the three wins? Patience. And so have we been able to move our therapies forward? Yeah, I just talked to you about the Fierce Head and Neck study, the Strike study, the Tenivo 2 study, the AML study. We didn't touch too much on rilogrotug, which is our GDF15 antibody for cachexia. That's moving forward in clinical development. Again, as a reminder, there's no effective treatments for cachexia. Cachexia is this kind of wasting syndrome that you saw. Steve Jobs probably died of his cachexia, not his pancreatic cancer. And as similar to head and neck, it's that kind of visible seeing your disease, your sickness. And it's just a shame that there's nothing there out there to treat these patients effectively. So this is an important program for us.
That's no, that's great. It sounds like it's been an outstanding partnership. Anything that you can talk about that may lie ahead?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think M&A is going to be a big part of our future. As I mentioned, we just did a deal or announced a deal at the end of last year. We're constantly looking for other opportunities and innovations. Look, the biotech industry is the source of innovation, in my view, for at least the majority of innovation. And it's tough to find kind of financial resources, backing, infrastructure, all the things that it takes to be successful. And, we think at LG, with LG, as our parent company, it really helps us help them. And again, achieving that goal. But I'm sorry, I didn't finish. The second win was the investors, and the third win was our employees, which were all retained in the acquisition because they really wanted that infrastructure.
You talked about some of the key factors here that are playing into the biotech industry. When you look at it, can you provide any forecast? Let me ask that for the biotech industry in 2026. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, biotech is risky business. It's always been challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding. So
Mm.
I'll just kind of reference some of the themes. I've probably read a dozen or more reports on themes coming out of JP Morgan, was there with our LG colleagues looking for other opportunities. Biotech has faced a really difficult time. And again, goes back to this LG acquisition in 2023. This was the nuclear winter for financing in biotech. It was really a very difficult time. And, it's been that way for a couple of years. I am encouraged to say that, the sentiment coming out of the end of last year, you're starting to see a little more capital coming into the marketplace and supporting biotech investment. 2026, some of the themes that came out of JP Morgan, M&A renaissance is starting to come back. A lot of this is, big pharma needing to cover their patent cliffs, so they're actively looking for innovation. LG, as I mentioned, sees this as an important source of our expanding and our innovation going forward, but also kind of a return to fundamentals with a lot of the policies that have been coming down and the agendas that people are trying to get their head around. I think that really hampered us in 2025. I think 2026, people are starting to get a little more comfortable with that. So we're going back to not being reactive to, administrative changes or administration changes, but more to the fundamentals of business. Let's make sure our commercialization going right. Let's make sure we're on time with our clinical studies. Let's make sure we're being fiscally responsible as we're developing things. And this was always been our philosophy. And again, LG is very much interested in understanding and the fundamentals of running a business as a major international conglomerate. You can imagine they're pretty skilled at making sure we're not getting out of line on our budgets and staying on timelines. The third theme that was coming out of JP Morgan is AI. And the theme, there's been so much excitement about AI and the potential of it, but I feel like people are starting to be a little more mature about it, or the technology is kind of becoming more embedded in our industry. And you saw a couple deals, Lilly and GSK making just tremendous investments in artificial intelligence. I will say that LG Chem we refer to the ABCs. A is artificial intelligence, B, biotech, and then C is clean energy, kind of electric batteries, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, again, nothing new to us, and I feel like with LG, we're on the cutting edge. And then the other area I think of promise is just we continue to see innovations, a lot of next-generation therapies, next-generation CAR-Ts, ADCs. And again, I made a reference to LG's research capabilities in oncology, and all of these ideas are in their sweet spot, and we're looking at them as the next generation, if you will, of our portfolio. On the downside, I think there's been a lot of talk about China, and China kind of emerging from a fast follower type entity to a leader. And I read some stats the other day, over 2,300 biotechs in China. And this kind of went by without a whole lot of notice. In 2024, China surpassed us in the number of clinical trials in the U.S. So this is a real threat to I think our leadership in the industry, and it really comes back to being more efficient. I mean, they're just able to take an idea and get it far into the clinic so much faster than we are, and I think we just have to improve on that efficiency in order to continue to be the leaders here.
Michael, this has been an outstanding conversation. Before I let you go, is there any practical advice you'd give for anyone interested in breaking into this industry?
Look, it's a privilege to be working in this industry, and I think that's really important to understand. We're not making potato chips, we're not making beer. We're trying to improve lives of patients, and so the whole idea of being mission focused, believe in something bigger than you, because you're going to have bad days in any business, any career. You have bad days, but when I have a bad day, I wake up and I say, why am I doing this? And it's crystal clear why I'm doing it, and it's a good thing to do. So, that mission focus gets you, through a whole lot. But I think also, because this is such a risky business that we're in, realistic optimism is important. You can't just go and expect to hit everyone out of the park. It's just not going to happen. That's just not how our business goes. So, managing through kind of failures, I think, is important. One of the things I always say is there's a fine line between perseverance and insanity, right? So, you do have to know when to fold. And, one of the, I think, core philosophies of this industry is, to the extent that you can kill it early, if you get signals that you're not wanting to see, then move on and try to move to the next innovation. And that kind of brings me to the next thing, which is be an objective data junkie. Never ignore data. Do it at your own peril. and all decisions, you can't get yourself caught up in analysis paralysis that because you're going to have to make decisions in uncertainty, but trying to strike that right balance between, continuing to innovate and move the program forward and knowing exactly what's going to come out. But also, if you see something, don't ignore it. It's really important not to ignore bad signals. Try to understand them as much as you can.
That's great advice, Michael. Yeah, for sure. Sorry, go on. Yeah, was there anything else?
No, I was just going to say, I could go on, but
yeah,
one of the other big ones, and I think this is one to think about is, learn from setbacks. If I could define my career, I've been involved in some major, very public setbacks. And the thing is, if you can learn from those, you need to learn from those things. And I think that's one of the values that I bring as I, consider my career and boards and continuing to advise people is, learning from your mistakes and then making sure you impart that information so that somebody else doesn't make a mistake that could have been avoided. And that, it comes back to that kind of responsibility. We're doing something really important here. And so it's not, there's competition, certainly, but at the end of the day, I think there's more collaboration than there is competition in this industry. And the last thing I'll say, this is something I got from a guy who I used to work with, Gerald Mosley. He called it 5 E's and kind of think about your career. I've since modified it to the 6 E's of life and career. The first one, teens are for excitement. Right? Have fun while you're a kid because you're going to be working for the rest of your life. 20s are for education, and that means 20s. You take that opportunity to get as much education as you possibly can to build that foundation for in the future. 30s are for experience, and this is probably one of the areas where I see most people starting to get a little itchy. They're 30 years old, and it's like, I'm not a senior vice president, I'm not a C-suite, I'm not, this or that. Keep in mind, 30s is where you're getting the experience, where you're, learning the ropes, where you're learning from mistakes of yourself or others. Then 40s, if you're successful at getting that experience, 40s is E of it for equity. That's where you start kind of building your financial security, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is where I modified Gerald's. He used to say 50s are for enjoyment, but I think he came up with this in like the 80s. So it's a little different now. And I look at my 50s as really what all my E would be empowerment. And it's kind of mentoring. I feel a responsibility to, take all the learnings that I've had from my 30 years in a career and make sure that, again, as I mentioned, people don't make that same mistakes. And then what Gerald used to have, the enjoyment on 50s, I've moved that to the 60s. Is enjoyment, but enjoyment with a purpose. People ask me, like, when are you going to retire? And my simple answer is when it stops being fun.
The 6 E's. That's great stuff, Michael. I really appreciate it. This has been an outstanding conversation. A lot of great stuff coming from AVEO. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Thomas.
If you'd like more information on AVEO Oncology, visit their website at aveooncology.com. You can also connect with Michael on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on Talking the Walk. Tune in to hear us weekdays at 8:30 a.m., 4:30 p.m., and 12:30 a.m. Eastern Time. You can also find all of our episodes on the Talking the Walk program page on healthcarenowradio.com. If you're walking the talk, we want to talk to you. Connect with me on LinkedIn or by filling out the show's contact form on healthcarenowradio.com. Until next time, keep walking your talk. I'm Tom Testa. Take care, everyone.